Hello, my name's Arlena. I drove 8 hours through hail and wind just to surprise my parents on their 50th anniversary. Cake in the back seat, hope in my chest. But when I walked in, they didn't even have my name on the guest list. No room key, no seat, no mention. Just silence, like I'd never existed. What kind of family celebrates without their daughter? And what happens when that daughter finally stops waiting to be welcomed and starts asking why? The wipers scraped across the windshield like nails on glass, each swing barely clearing the heavy mix of rain and sleet coming down in sheets. I'd been driving for nearly 8 hours, through mountain fog and patches of hail that made my hands clench the steering wheel like I was bracing for impact. The silence in the car was louder than the storm itself. I didn't turn on music, didn't call anyone. My phone sat face down on the passenger seat next to a small white box tied with a red ribbon. Inside, a dozen lemon cupcakes I'd stayed up baking last night. My mother used to love lemon. I told myself this time might be different. It was their 50th wedding anniversary. A milestone. I'd booked a room at a nearby inn, bought a soft cardigan my mother once gave me, and folded it neatly in my overnight bag. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see I still tried. Maybe I'd walk in, dripping wet and unexpected, and my father would smile like he used to, motion me over with a big laugh. Maybe my mother's eyes would light up and she'd say, "You always did have the worst timing, but come here." I clung to that fantasy as I passed the "Welcome to Santa Barbara" sign just before sunset, the sky bleeding gray over the coastline. I pulled up a block away from the house, a Spanish-style villa on the bluff overlooking the Pacific. The same house I'd once called home. Cars lined the street. The glow of warm lights poured from the windows, flickering against the storm like nothing could touch them. Laughter, music. Someone clinked a glass inside. I parked behind a dark SUV and killed the engine. The rain drummed harder now. I grabbed the cupcake box in my coat, slipped the key into my purse, and stepped out. The cold was immediate and sharp. My heels clicked against the wet pavement as I crossed the street, hair sticking to my cheeks, water slipping past my collar. My fingers tightened around the box, like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The closer I got, the more I noticed the little details. Tulips in the flower beds, party lights strung over the archway, a valet checking umbrellas. I stood at the door, heart racing. I rang the bell. A young woman answered, mid-20s maybe, wearing a headset and holding a clipboard. The kind of cool efficiency that made you feel like an interruption. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Arlena," I said, my voice tight. "I'm here for the anniversary party." She glanced at her clipboard, flipped a few pages, looked up. "Last name?" "Vexley." Her eyes flickered with something, discomfort maybe? She looked again, then back at me. "I'm sorry, I don't have you listed on the guest registry." My smile froze. "I'm their daughter." She blinked. "Oh, hang on. Let me check with someone inside." She stepped away before I could say another word. I stood there, cupcakes slowly soaking through their box, coat clinging to my spine. The air felt thinner than it had before. Through the door's narrow window, I saw Lorana, my older sister, grinning under the chandeliers. Her husband Benton poured champagne into a line of flutes. Their daughter twirled in a velvet dress like she was the guest of honor. No one looked toward the door. Minutes passed. The planner didn't return. No one did. The music swelled. I heard someone tap a fork against glass, a toast rising up over the crowd. I shifted my weight, the water seeping down into my boots. My name wasn't missed. My presence wasn't expected. It had been removed. The last time something like this happened, years ago at my niece's recital, I told myself it was a mistake, a miscommunication. But this? This was deliberate. I backed off the porch. The cupcakes were ruined. My hair was ruined. But that wasn't what stung. It was the look in that woman's eyes when she didn't recognize me. It was the way the house where I learned to walk, where I nursed my first heartbreak, where I once sang Happy Anniversary with frosting on my chin, stood so tall, so warm, and yet made no space for me. I didn't walk back to the car. Not yet. Instead, I stepped to the side, out of sight, but still in the rain, and looked back at the house. I needed to see who else walked in. Who else had a seat at the table I helped set, year after year. I needed to know how far this went. So I stopped waiting to be seen, and started watching what they didn't want me to know. From the edge of the driveway, I lingered long enough to spot the people arriving. Names I recognized from my childhood, neighbors from years ago, distant relatives I hadn't seen since I still wore braces. I watched them walk past the entry with hugs and warm welcomes. Champagne flutes passed to them like admission tickets. But no one came out for me. I wasn't even a forgotten coat left behind in the rain. I was a decision. Eventually, I turned and walked back to my car. My coat had soaked through completely. The cupcake box had collapsed inward, lemon frosting smeared along the lid. I set it gently on the passenger seat, like it still meant something. By the time I reached the inn I had reserved for the weekend, this lovely Art Deco-style place with striped awnings and potted palms, I was already rehearsing how I'd phrase my check-in, pretending I wasn't dripping or emotionally unraveling. "Reservation for Arlena Vexley," I said, voice steadier than expected. The woman behind the counter typed something in. Then she paused, blinked, and looked at me with that same slight stiffness I'd come to recognize. Polite confusion. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your booking was canceled 3 days ago." I frowned. "That can't be right. I booked it 2 months ago through the app." She turned her screen slightly toward me. "It was canceled under your father's account. There's a note here about reallocation for family coordination." My jaw locked. I hadn't used his account in years. The only reason he would have still had access to my itinerary is if someone gave it to him. Someone like Lorana. "Do you have any other rooms?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "There's a medical tech conference in town," she said gently. "I'm afraid we're fully booked." I stepped outside again. It had stopped raining, but my body couldn't tell the difference. I sat behind the wheel for what felt like an hour, trying to will away the sting behind my eyes. Then I reached for my phone and called Sophie, my college roommate, the one person who never made me feel like a burden. "Girl, are you serious?" she said when I explained. "You drove all the way here and they didn't even list you? Get over here right now. I got a pull-out couch and leftover pad thai." I drove the 40 minutes in silence. Her neighborhood was nestled in the hills, the kind where everyone parked halfway on the curb and porch lights stayed on year-round. Sophie greeted me barefoot in flannel pants, gave me a hug that cracked my spine, and didn't ask a single unnecessary question. She handed me a blanket and let me sleep. The next morning, I pulled my hair into a bun, put on my best navy dress, and reapplied lipstick with the same precision as someone preparing for war. This time, I didn't ring the doorbell or wait for someone to remember me. I walked straight into the venue. The ballroom was drenched in gold. Chandelier crystals tossed reflections across the floor. A pianist played something elegant and hollow. Lorana had spared no expense. White lilies on every table, seating cards in cursive, staff in tuxedo vests. I saw faces I hadn't seen in decades, and most of them barely looked twice at me. When my parents came into view, I instinctively stood straighter. My mother's hair was pinned in soft curls. My father wore the same navy blazer I remembered from his retirement party. They were mid-conversation with Lorana, who glowed in a champagne dress. Dad saw me first. He nodded. That was all. Not a smile. Not even a raised brow of surprise. Just a nod. Like he wasn't sure where to place me in the room. Mom waved faintly, her hand rising halfway before she turned back to the waiter beside her. She complimented the hors d'oeuvres. Didn't look my way again. I found a seat at the far end of the room, near the restroom corridor. A side table marked Overflow Family. No one spoke to me, except a woman I didn't recognize, who asked if this was the line for the bar. Then came the speeches. Lorana stood first, naturally. She began with a theatrical pause and pressed her hand to her heart. "Our parents built everything we have," she said, her voice quivering just enough. They taught us about loyalty, about commitment, about unconditional love. I almost laughed. The applause came like waves. Her husband Benton followed, sharing stories that painted them as saints who raised perfect children. One of our cousins stood next, recalling a summer vacation where they taught him how to fish. Through it all, I sat there like wallpaper, present but unnoticed. When Uncle Joe stood up with a final toast, my heart jumped a little. Maybe, just maybe, he'd say something, a line, a name, a nod to the fact there was another daughter in the room. He didn't, not one syllable. As the guests clapped, I didn't. It wasn't stubbornness, it was paralysis. The clapping drowned in my ears like I'd fallen underwater. My fingers curled around the stem of my glass until I felt the ridge of the base pressing into my palm. I forced myself to sip the champagne, but it might as well have been air. At the cocktail hour, I drifted toward the exit, but got intercepted by Pamela, one of our distant cousins, who always wore too much floral and called everyone Han. "Oh," she said, startled. "I didn't realize you'd be here. Lorana said you were probably busy back home." That stung more than I cared to admit. "Surprise," I said, with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Across the room, Lorana laughed, surrounded by guests, wine in hand, basking in it. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her message had already arrived in every silence and sidestep, in the absence of a room key, in the absence of a toast, in the absence of even one word of acknowledgement. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me, carefully, deliberately, as if I'd never existed at all. The murmur of clinking glass and polite laughter dimmed behind me as I walked out of the main hall and into a quiet corridor that led toward the reception room. I needed space. I needed oxygen. My heels clicked softly against the tile, but inside me, there was a roar that wouldn't quit. I ended up in the lounge area near the back, where a few other guests were sipping coffee and nibbling biscotti. The space had a low hum, just enough distraction to keep my expression neutral, while my mind turned over what had just happened. A projector screen was being set up near the dining area. Someone tapped the microphone and announced that a family slideshow would begin shortly. I returned to my table, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it. I needed to know how deep this went. The lights dimmed. The screen glowed to life. A soft, sentimental, instrumental version of What a Wonderful World played over speakers. The first photo was of my parents, young, smiling, standing outside the bungalow where they raised us. The next image was of Lorana, swaddled in baby blankets. Then a sequence of birthdays, vacations, graduations. I watched my sister grow older with every frame. Their lives unfolded like a scrapbook, but I wasn't in it. Not in the Disneyland photo, where I clearly remembered being the one who got sick after the teacup ride. Not in the Christmas picture, where I was the one who'd saved up and bought Mom the snow globe. Not even in the family barbecue shots, where I had stood at the grill every year, while Lorana held court under the patio lights. Someone behind me leaned to whisper, "Didn't they have another daughter?" I felt that like a knife, not because it was cruel, but because it was curious, unaware. The way you ask about a forgotten pet or a misplaced childhood friend, like I had been lost and not purposely removed. I got up, walked out before the slideshow could finish. I didn't need to see any more to know where I stood, or rather, where I didn't. The hallway led to a small balcony overlooking the cliffside. The ocean churned below. The air was sharp, salt-filled. I leaned against the railing and tried to breathe. My fingers trembled around the phone in my hand. It wasn't always like this. I had memories. Real ones. Ones with weight. Like when I was 7, sitting in the garage with my dad. The two of us piecing together a cardboard volcano for the science fair. He let me paint the lava red, even though I spilled half the bottle on his jeans. He laughed and called it authentic. Or when I stayed up all night in college to set up the GoFundMe after their car accident. Lorana was unreachable, on a cruise in Greece. I coordinated the hospital bills, the physical therapy, the in-home nurse. I even opened a temporary trust in Lorana's name because Mom couldn't sign the documents from her hospital bed. I told myself it was just for a week or two, until things stabilized. Somewhere between then and now, that temporary gesture turned permanent. With a numb sort of clarity, I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. It took a moment to load, weak signal near the water. But when it did, I saw it. The trust account was still active, still in Lorana's name. My access had been revoked. I stared at the screen, then called the bank hotline, gave them the reference number. The agent on the line confirmed that years ago, the account was legally transferred to Lorana's sole control. A signature was on file. Not mine. I could barely feel my fingertips. The balance had grown. Interest, donations, some matching funds I remembered arranging. It was well over 6 figures. That money was never for Lorana. It was supposed to be a safety net for our parents. I lowered the phone and stared out at the water, lips parted. They used my love as capital, I whispered. Not to anyone in particular, just to the wind, or maybe to the girl I used to be. When I walked back inside, the lights had come up again. The slideshow was finishing. I arrived just in time to catch the final image splashed across the giant screen. A family photo. The words, "Our Legacy," written in gold script across the top. In the image stood Lorana, our parents, Benton and his children from his first marriage, several cousins, and a few neighbors I barely recognized. I wasn't in the photo. Not even my name was listed. People clapped like it was some grand finale. Someone dabbed at their eyes with a napkin. Another raised a glass. I stood still. They didn't forget me, I thought. They rewrote me out. And I let them. I let them because I kept telling myself it was temporary, that maybe next time would be different, that I didn't want to cause a scene, that love meant letting things go. But this wasn't forgetfulness. It was precision. It was erasure. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in Sophie's guest room, laptop balanced on my knees, and began gathering everything I had. Screenshots of donations, email receipts, banking statements, notarized forms, old voicemails. Every pixel, every file, every breadcrumb I'd left behind while they built their version of the story without me. I took it back. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was archiving. Once the last document printed and my laptop dimmed itself to sleep, I sat in the quiet of Sophie's guest room and listened to the tick of the wall clock, to the faint hum of traffic outside. I'd come here with frosting in my hair and hope in my chest. I was leaving with files, receipts, and something sharper than bitterness: clarity. The following evening marked the second half of the celebration. Formal speeches, toasts, and those long-winded anecdotes that only matter to the people who love to hear themselves speak. I arrived in a navy silk dress, hairpinned, face unreadable. Sophie offered to come with me, but I told her no. I needed to do this alone. Inside, the ballroom had changed. Tables were rearranged, lights slightly dimmer, and the wine was flowing faster than yesterday. The air buzzed with practiced elegance. I slid into a corner chair without a word. I didn't need a spotlight to know exactly what I was looking for. Lorana stood up near the podium again, champagne flute lifted high, her smile rehearsed. "We're so thankful to each of you," she said. "This night wouldn't be possible without the generosity and love that built this family. It was all worth it, even if I had to pull from our own savings to make it happen." Applause erupted. A few guests even gave a standing ovation. I didn't move. My hand gripped the base of my wine glass hard enough to leave an imprint. Her savings? That trust wasn't hers. That account existed because I built it from scratch, brick by brick, out of worry, out of love, out of the kind of loyalty that once kept me quiet. And she used it as her own blank check to fund a night that pretended I didn't exist. I didn't flinch, but my jaw locked tight. After the applause settled, I slipped toward the catering corridor, a quiet hallway where servers shuffled in and out, balancing trays and muttering under their breath. Lorana followed soon after, clearly heading toward the restroom. She didn't notice me until I spoke. Did you just use my money to buy your moment? She turned, caught off guard for a split second before regaining her composure. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play stupid, Lorana. The trust fund. The one I built for Mom and Dad's care. You took it. She scoffed and rolled her eyes. Everything's joint in this family, Arlena. Always has been. You act like you're owed something just because you… What? Transferred some paperwork years ago? I didn't blink. Not anymore, I said, my voice low and direct. She chuckled, then sipped her champagne with a practiced grace. What are you going to do, Arlena? Blog about it? I turned without another word and walked away. But the truth was, I wasn't walking off in defeat. I was walking into position. My silence wasn't surrender, it was alignment. Later that night, as I waited in the valet line, Greg Hensley, an old family friend and retired accountant, tapped my shoulder. I wasn't sure I should bring this up, he said, voice low, but I noticed something odd when reviewing some estate docs with your dad last month. I straightened. What kind of odd? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Your name is no longer listed on the Ventura property deed. I remembered it was added in after the refinancing in 2017. But now, it's just under your parents and Lorana. My hands went cold. I never signed anything. That's what struck me. I thought maybe you'd removed yourself. But now I'm not so sure. I can send you what I've got. PDFs, timestamps, whatever you need. Please do, I said. Email them as soon as you can. As my car pulled up, I slid into the passenger seat, closed the door, and leaned my head back against the leather. The engine hummed, but my thoughts were louder. That house, the one I helped secure, that my name had been on for years, was no longer mine, and I hadn't lifted a pen. By the time I returned to Sophie's guest house, I was done hoping for decency. I powered on my laptop, pulled up the PDFs Greg had just emailed, and began laying out every document I had. Bank transfers, trust authorizations, notarized letters, page after page of my handwriting, my decisions, my intent, all repackaged by someone else. They weren't just trying to cut me out. They were dressing themselves in everything I'd built, and then acting like I had no place at the table I'd spent decades helping set. I whispered into the stillness. They want a legacy without me? Then I'll build one they can't erase. I drafted an email, subject line bold. You have 48 hours to explain this, before it goes beyond just us. I didn't send it, not yet, but it sat there, glowing on the screen like a lit fuse. They'd get one more chance to do the right thing. One. Because if they chose ego over truth again, they wouldn't be answering to me alone. The next morning, the air was thick with a quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not grief, not regret, just space. I stood in Sophie's kitchen, stirring coffee, watching the sun inch its way across the windowsill, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a voicemail from my father. Arlena, your behavior last night was disappointing. This weekend was about us, not you. Not a word about the trust fund. Not a breath about the property deed. Not even a blink toward Lorana's fraud. That was it. The final push I didn't know I still needed. Sophie glanced up from the paper. Was that him? I nodded and set my mug down. He thinks I embarrassed them. She folded the page, voice quiet. They'll spin this, you know. Turn it into your fault. I met her gaze with something colder than anger. Then I'll spin it first. We left not long after. I dressed in a simple slate gray blouse and black pants. I wasn't aiming for elegance anymore. I wanted focus. That day's event was a casual farewell brunch on the hotel's rooftop garden, a send-off for the extended family before they scattered back to Florida, Idaho, Michigan. It was also the only time the microphone was open. No official speeches were planned, just an invitation for memories and reflections. A few cousins joked into the mic. Benton made another rambling toast that landed with a thud. Aunt Pauline told a story about her honeymoon in 1969, And then I stood up. I didn't walk fast. I didn't smile. I just rose, stepped forward, and waited as the room quieted. "I'm Arlena Vexley," I began, my voice firm and even. "Youngest daughter, architect of the Ventura Refinance, founder of the Emergency Medical Fund after our parents' accident, absent from your slideshow." Silence wrapped the crowd like a curtain. Someone put down their mimosa a little too hard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I laid it out clearly. How I'd covered hospital bills during the lapse in their insurance. How I'd organized the fundraiser when no one else stepped up. I mentioned the refinance and the documents I never signed, but somehow disappeared from. I didn't point fingers. I didn't say Lorana's name. I didn't have to. "I used to think being quiet meant being respectful," I said, looking slowly across the room. "I now understand silence only helps lies grow louder." Then I stepped down. No grand exit. No stomp. No tears. Just me, sitting back in my chair, sipping from my glass of water like it was any other Tuesday. At first, no one clapped. Then a single set of hands, soft, unsure. Another followed. And then, nothing. No eruption, no applause line. Just stunned silence hanging thick as smoke. My mother stared at her plate. My father looked like he wanted to speak but forgot how. Lorana? Nowhere. She'd vanished before the first word left my mouth. I ate a single grape off the fruit tray in front of me, just to have something to do with my hands. When the brunch finally ended and people began to drift away in clusters of polite confusion, my mother found me by the elevators. Her mouth was tight. Her nails tapped the silver clutch in her hand. "How dare you humiliate us like that?" she hissed. I held her gaze, calm and still. "You're not upset because I lied. You're upset because I told the truth out loud." Her jaw clenched, but I didn't give her room to respond. I leaned in, just enough that she could hear me clearly, but no one else could. "If you keep using my name behind my back," I said softly, "then I'll make sure it's the only name the IRS hears when they come knocking." Her lips parted. Whether it was shock or fear, I didn't wait to find out. I turned and walked toward the elevator as the doors opened. Back in the car, I let out a slow breath and looked out at the Santa Barbara hills. I had said what needed to be said. No yelling, no pleading, just facts. They couldn't ignore me anymore. Not without looking directly into the mirror I just held up. And the next morning, my phone rang again. It was my financial advisor. "Arlena," she said cautiously, "you've got some standing guarantees tied to the family estate. Do you want to revoke all of them?" I didn't pause. Not this time. The silence on the line said enough. "Revoke everything," I told Camille. She didn't respond right away. There was a pause, the kind where you could hear someone leaning back in their office chair, rethinking years of familiarity. "You're absolutely sure, Arlena? Because once this goes through..." "Every signature, every authorization, every bridge I ever helped them build," I cut in. "Burn it down." Camille took a slow breath. "Then I'll get the paperwork started. It'll destabilize the estate. Your name holds weight." "Not anymore," I replied. "Let it fall." I was back in Chicago now. The skies here were duller than Santa Barbara's, but somehow that suited my mood better. No pretense, no glamour, just the facts, laid bare like concrete beneath peeling paint. Later that morning, my inbox filled in like clockwork. First came the flagged activity, an attempt from my father's financial profile to authorize a loan using the Ventura property. Under guarantor, my name was listed. That's when I moved. I opened every shared folder, every joint document, and pulled down every trace I could find. Old PDFs, notarized contracts, trust papers that still bore my maiden signature. I consolidated them into one file, the kind that didn't shout, but roared when opened. Then I sent it out. 3 emails, no fanfare. To their mortgage company, the attached documentation reflects unauthorized use of my legal identity. I do not support or acknowledge the current loan. To the IRS fraud reporting system, flag for potential identity misrepresentation related to the attached estate. And to Lorana, no subject line, just one phrase in the body. I no longer cosign lies. That was all it said. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. By early afternoon, Camille messaged me back. Confirmed. All guarantees officially revoked as of 1:14 p.m. Central. By 1:30, Benton tried calling. Not his usual number. Probably borrowed someone else's line, thinking I'd pick up. When I didn't, he texted instead. You'll ruin us. You realize that, right? You'll leave them with nothing. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering for a moment. Then I wrote, I'm not ruining anything. I'm just letting the truth stand without me holding it up. I hit send. Then I blocked the number. I leaned back in my chair, letting the hum of the radiator fill the space around me. It was strange how quiet this kind of vengeance was. No screaming, no plates thrown. Just a click, a file upload, a legal revocation. Turns out power doesn't have to be loud to be final. That night, I sat with Sophie out on her porch. The fall breeze had turned sharper, but I didn't mind. I wrapped the blanket tighter and pulled my mug of tea close. You okay? She asked gently. I thought for a moment. I'm tired, I admitted, but I'm not fragile anymore. She nodded. It took a lot to get here. I looked out at the street, dim under the porch light. Funny how the moment I stopped asking for a seat, I started carving my own table. Sophie smiled, then leaned into her mug. They don't even realize it yet. They will, I said. I made sure of that. Right before bed, another message landed in my inbox. This one from Camille. A simple line. Credit structure collapsed. Property status will reflect within 72 hours. She added, it might be wise to have legal support in place. They could push back harder now. I didn't hesitate. I replied, loop in Harriet. Let's get ahead of it. I shut the laptop and pulled the blanket tighter around me. Outside, a gust of wind rustled the trees. They thought I'd crumble. Instead, I left them a roadmap to their own collapse and took back every piece of myself they ever tried to claim. 3 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't from Lorena, not from my mother either. It was from their attorney. And what it said caught me completely off guard. The envelope wasn't thick, but it felt heavier than it should have, like it knew what it carried. I opened it in my office, lights low, coffee cooling beside my hand. I expected threats, legal saber rattling, a demand to retract, to apologize, to fix the damage they claimed I'd caused. Instead, it was an invitation. A request to meet for a confidential family legal discussion regarding estate matters, scheduled at a private law office just outside Santa Barbara. Sophie looked at the letter from across the counter while drying her hands. That's not a peace offering, she said. It's a setup. I nodded. It's bait. But you're going anyway, she added. Not a question. Not for them, I said. For me. It was 2 days later when I walked into the conference room. Cool air, polished wood, a pitcher of lemon water no one touched. My parents were already seated, both dressed like they were attending church and scandal at the same time. Lorana sat to their right, crossed legs and a smug expression tucked behind her red lipstick. Benton hovered behind her, a silent guard dog. There were 2 attorneys, one for them, one neutral, supposedly. Mine was on call, aware, waiting for an update. Thank you for coming, one of the suited men said, gesturing toward the open seat. I didn't take it. Thurman, my father, leaned forward, tone saccharine. Arlena, we've been reflecting. This family's gone off course. All we ask is that you reinstate some of your prior agreements. Your financial guarantees meant stability. I smiled. That's why you waited until the estate cracked to ask, he faltered. My mother looked everywhere but my face. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope of my own, certified, notarized. I brought a copy of my will, I said, voice steady. Lorana stiffened. All of my assets. The condo, the equity shares, the patents I hold from university research. They're no longer tied to the family. Everything goes to Milestone Women's Recovery Shelter now. They never made me prove my worth. They just accepted I had it. My mother's hand went to her pearls, like they could shield her from shame. Benton muttered something under his breath. "What the hell is this, a performance?" he said, too loud for a room with walls that echoed. I turned back to my father. "You hosted a gala using my money and told the world it came from her." I nodded toward Lorana. "And now you're asking for reinstatement?" "We were trying to protect the family legacy," my mother said quickly. I let out a small laugh. Not cruel, just tired. From what? The truth? Then came the unexpected break. My father slammed a hand against the table, not with rage, but remorse. "I told her," he said, gesturing to my mother. "I told her playing favorites would destroy us, that letting Lorana run the books, steer the estate, was asking for collapse. But she said Arlena would always be too quiet to fight." The room tilted. Even Lorana blinked. "You didn't stop her either," I said to him. He nodded. "No, I didn't." That crack widened fast. Benton barked, "This is ridiculous. Arlena's always played the martyr. She thrives on it." Lorana scoffed. "You love being the victim. It's your brand now, huh? Self-righteous silence and long stares?" I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into my purse again and placed something small and metallic on the table. A voice recorder, red light blinking faintly. I needed a record, just in case the family truth ever started sounding like fiction. The room froze. My mother's eyes darted toward the attorneys. Thurman dropped his gaze. "You bugged this?" Lorana hissed. "No," I said. "I brought it, and I'm keeping it." I walked out before anyone could answer. Let the implosion happen without me. They'd written the story, but I owned the audio. Sophie was parked at the curb, waiting. I climbed in without a word, pulled the seatbelt across my chest. "How'd it go?" she asked softly. I stared ahead for a moment. Then, "It's not my family anymore. Just some people I share a blood type with." We drove without talking. The sun dipped low behind the hills, washing everything in a golden haze. It should have hurt more than it did, but it didn't. Not anymore. In my bag, I clutched the recorder like a compass, proof of what had been spoken in the dark. No more silence. No more rewriting me out of history. That night, while I was brushing my teeth, Sophie's phone lit up across the counter. She glanced at it, face suddenly alert. "You need to see this," she said. 3 hours after that meeting, and I hadn't leaked a thing. But someone had. Sophie handed me the phone, and I stared at the screen. It was a video, low quality, but unmistakably real. My voice, my words, my family's crumbling silence in the background. Someone had recorded the estate meeting, and someone had leaked it. The group chat bubbles at the bottom read like nervous whispers. "Did you see what Arlena said? Is that her dad admitting it? Wow, just wow!" The clip was already circling among old neighbors, family acquaintances, even a few former coworkers who still followed me out of polite curiosity. I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. By mid-morning, my inbox was flooded, some with apologies, a few with veiled judgment, most with stunned silence. But none of it changed my plan. I had one final appearance to make. The last brunch event was set at a vineyard just outside town. I drove myself this time. No Sophie, no shield, just me and the weight of truth already scattered across a dozen inboxes. The air was light, a breeze rolling off the hills like a curtain lifting. Champagne glasses clinked, laughter buzzed low, and the string quartet played something delicate and forgettable. I parked, got out, adjusted my coat, and walked in. No one stopped me, until Lorraine, my cousin, intercepted me near the reception table. "You really think this is the place to show your face after that?" she whispered. I looked her squarely in the eyes and said, "I'm not here to be seen, I'm here to be finished." I passed her without breaking stride. Inside, people paused when they saw me. Forks froze midair. A few tried to smile, performative warmth, like thin napkins in a downpour. I didn't return them. Lorana stood at the far end, stiff as ever, surrounded by a smaller cluster than usual. Her laugh, always a little too loud, had dimmed to something hollow. I walked to the buffet, poured myself half a glass of champagne, and turned to face the room. No microphone, no stage, just my voice. I know I wasn't invited to toast today, but I'll make it quick. People shifted, unsure whether to sit taller or sink lower. I want to raise this glass, not to the past, not to what was polished to look better than it ever felt. I want to toast what's real, starting over, not when you're young and eager, but when you're older, smarter, and finally willing to stop apologizing for existing. I took a slow sip, my eyes scanning faces I'd once called home. To those who expected nothing from me, thank you. It made finding my worth so much clearer. I crossed the room and stopped by my mother's chair. She looked up, lips tight, hands folded. "I left you something," I said, placing a folded letter beside her plate. "It's the last thing I'll ever ask you to read." Then I turned and left. The wind outside caught the edge of my coat like an old friend tugging me forward. In the parking lot, I handed the valet a ticket, and he brought my car with a quick nod. Sophie was already inside, arms folded, waiting. "Well?" "It's done," I said as I closed the door and pulled the seatbelt across my lap. As we drove away, I glanced in the mirror. Behind us, a ripple spread across the tables like water disturbed. My name wouldn't be whispered in admiration, but it would be remembered. The letter? Nothing theatrical. It simply read, "This isn't about the money. This is about the memory. And mine matters too." Attached were 10 pages of bank records, signed transfers, dated donations. The cover sheet titled, "Donations You Never Remembered." My father would read it, my mother probably wouldn't. But that didn't matter anymore. It wasn't for them. It was for me. Back in the car, Sophie asked gently, "You sure this is it?" I nodded. They erased me for years. This was the last time I handed them a pen. An hour later, we pulled up to a lake cabin I had booked weeks ago, just in case. I thought I might cancel it, that I'd be too emotionally spent to want isolation. But the second I stepped inside, I knew it was exactly where I needed to be. The space was small but warm. Wood paneling, stone fireplace, a view of the water that shimmered even in stillness. I lit a candle, brewed tea, and set my suitcase by the bed. Then I opened the duffel bag that had followed me through every mile of this mess, through the rain, the silence, the confrontations. Inside were the letters I'd kept, and the photos I'd hidden, the journal I hadn't opened in 4 years. I spread them out across the bed, like pieces of a map I was finally willing to read. Some I threw away, some I framed. Then I picked up my pen and opened to the first blank page of the journal. I didn't write a novel. I didn't even use a paragraph. Just one sentence. My story isn't theirs to erase. And I meant every word. The knock came just after sunrise. 3 short taps. Hesitant but familiar, like someone unsure if they were still welcome. I set down my coffee mug, the steam curling up between my fingers, and moved to the door without rushing. Part of me already knew who it was. I opened it. My father stood there, hands in the pockets of his jacket, the same kind he wore to mow the lawn when I was a child. His shoulders were hunched, like the weight of everything he'd ignored had finally settled in. "I just needed to see you," he said, not looking me fully in the eye. "To know you're all right." I didn't invite him in, but I stepped aside just enough so he could see I wasn't alone, or broken, or lost. "I'm fine," I said. There was a long pause. No excuses, no apologies, just breath between us and the sound of birds waking the trees. "You didn't deserve the silence," he finally muttered, his voice thick with things he wasn't ready to say. "We gave you too much of it." I nodded once. Not with forgiveness, but with understanding. That was as much as I could offer. We stood by the lake in silence. It wasn't a moment of reconciliation. It wasn't some sweeping reunion. It was two people sharing space again. Awkward, fragile, real. Then he left. No dramatic goodbye, no plea to return. Just a quiet walk back to his car, and a glance in the rearview mirror that lasted longer than it should have. Later that week, news traveled fast. The family trust had been flagged. Lorraine and Benton were under financial audit. Their business credit lines frozen. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I didn't stop it either. One morning, a thick envelope arrived at my Hudson Valley mailbox. The logo on the top left corner. Milestone Women's Recovery Shelter. Inside was a handwritten note from the director. "Arlena, your commitment will help us open a second transitional housing unit next year. I hope you know what this means to us." Attached were photos. Smiling women in sunlit rooms. A list of needs being met. A sentence that brought a lump to my throat. "You gave us more than money. You gave us dignity." I sat with that letter on my lap for a long while. That night, I opened a new tab on my laptop, hit record, and spoke into the microphone. This is Daughters Who Left the Table, a podcast for women who stopped waiting for a seat and started building their own. Episode 1 began with my voice. Steady, calm, no script. Sometimes the people who raise you are the first to teach you how invisible you're allowed to be. But here, you're heard. Recording those first words felt like stitching together a tear that had lived in my chest for years. 2 weeks later, Sophie and I packed a small overnight bag and drove upstate. We checked into a retreat center nestled in the hills, surrounded by pine and silence. The air was clean, the kind that filled your lungs like hope. Over dinner, with fresh bread still warm from the oven and wine that tasted like summer, Sophie tilted her head and studied me. "You look like someone who made it back from war," she said. "Not untouched, but stronger." I smiled softly. Not all wars leave bruises you can see. We spent the next morning walking the gardens, sipping coffee, letting the quiet do its work. Before we left, we planted a tree together on the property, a small redbud. I named it Hope. That afternoon, in the shade of the retreat's front porch, I wrote a letter I'd never send. "Mom, if you ever decide to speak to me again, I hope it's not to edit the past or deny what happened. I hope it's to tell the truth, out loud, without conditions. Until then, I'll keep living mine." I folded the paper and placed it inside my journal. Not a bridge, just a seed. Some things don't need to grow right away. Some never will. Months passed gently after that. When the anniversary of my parents' wedding came around again, I woke early, not to drive, not to call, but to bake, not carrot cake. That belonged to a different time. I made a small lavender and lemon cake. Light, subtle, something new. I set the table out back, under the tree behind my place. Invited 3 women from the shelter who had no family nearby. One of them brought her teenage daughter. Another brought a poem. As we sipped tea and passed plates, one of them looked at me and asked, "So what's this cake called?" I paused, smiled. The beginning. And that's how it felt. Like life starting not over, but forward. Not a restoration, a rebirth. No speeches, no camera, no post for the world to clap for. Just the quiet sound of laughter, of shared bread, of hands brushing crumbs from a wooden table. And as the sun slid behind the trees, catching the edge of the plates and casting soft shadows, I sat back and realized, some journeys don't take you back home. They carry you toward the home you were meant to build. Before I go, I want to leave you with this. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Silence may keep the peace, but it also keeps the pain alive. For years, I thought loyalty meant staying quiet, swallowing every slight just to keep my place in a family that had no room for me. But the truth? Real love doesn't erase you. Real families don't ask you to shrink so others can shine. I used to believe that starting over had an expiration date, that if you hadn't rebuilt by 40 it was too late. But here I am, at 43, planting the first seeds of a life that finally belongs to me. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt forgotten, invisible, or erased, I see you, and I hope this story reminds you. Your voice matters, your story counts, and it is never too late to reclaim your name, your space, or your peace. Let me ask you this. Have you ever walked away from something that once felt like everything? What did it teach you about who you are? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments, even just a sentence. Sometimes that's all it takes to let healing begin. If this story touched your heart or gave you strength, type 1 in the comments, or tell me what city you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with this one, that's okay too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in from. I'm listening. And if you'd like to hear more stories that feel real, raw, and human, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's more on the way, and I'd love for you to walk with me through them. Until next time, be kind to yourself, and don't be afraid to walk away if the table was never set for you to begin with.